Hey everyone, this is David Brown from LycoBirds, and in this video I'm going to be showing the results from a 6-mile birding hike that I did with my family a few days ago at Skyline Drive south of Williamsport, Pennsylvania. If we take a quick look at a map, we're in north central Pennsylvania in Lycoming County. Here's Montoursville, which is the town I live in. West of there is Williamsport. And if you cross the river from Williamsport into South Williamsport, many of you who have traveled Route 15 may be familiar with this. There's a sharp left-hand turn, and then you go up past the McDonald's and past the Little League Stadium, and it takes you south on Route 15. But actually, if you continue straight at that curve, that takes you on 554, which takes you up on top of North White Deer Ridge. And as it turns at the top of the mountain there, you can actually park, and that's the beginning of Skyline Drive as you walk to the east. And as you start your walk, you come to a power line cut, and that's actually the White Deer Ridge Hawkwatch. But from there, we just continued on, and we followed the road all the way as far as it goes. So you can see it's pretty much on top of the mountain, and then it cuts to be more on the north face of the mountain, not quite all the way at the top. But you pass a couple of power line cuts and also some towers, communications towers and things like that. And eventually you come out actually along Route 15 at a little picnic area. Here's the view from that first power line cut looking to the south. Again, this is the site of the White Deer Ridge Hawkwatch, located on North White Deer Ridge. As you're looking here to the south, you see South White Deer Ridge. And if we look just slightly right from the view of that last photo, we see the habitat where there have been some prairie warblers, and we did get prairie warbler on this morning. And here's the view the other direction, looking off to the north over the Williamsport Water Authority property. It was actually a little bit chilly in the morning with a bit of a northerly wind and some fog. The one big surprise for me was how many American chestnut trees there are along this route. Here's the leaves of an American chestnut. You can see they're pretty big leaves, fairly long, and they have these big teeth around the edges. And I'm sure many of you know the history of the American chestnut, but I'll very briefly summarize it. American chestnut used to be one of the dominant trees of the forests of Pennsylvania until the chestnut blight came and literally killed billions of trees. So now the only American chestnuts that exist are basically these small saplings that come up out of old root systems. And most of them stay pretty skinny and grow up to maybe 20-25 feet or so before the blight kills them. Since we were walking from west to east, we were looking into the rising sun, but it was pretty beautiful with some sun rays shining through the fog. Here's a small power line cut, and any of these little cuts are interesting because it brings a change of habitat. So you go for more of the deep woods birds, and then you get to a spot like this, and maybe you start getting indigo bunting and chestnut-sided warbler. Here's a tree that I'm not too familiar with, but iNaturalist said that it's a mountain maple. Here's my brother Bobby birding in front of some Norway spruce trees at one of the tower sites. And these are the biggest towers that we passed on our hike. Here's another kind of maple tree. This is the striped maple, or Acer pennsylvanicum. And they usually stay relatively small, and they have these really big leaves. And I've mentioned in previous videos that these are good to use as toilet paper if you're ever in need in the woods. And they also have their fruit in the early summer. So you can see the samara here, these winged helicopters, as we always called them growing up. And one of the biggest reasons to get out in the woods this time of year is to see the Pennsylvania state flower, mountain laurel, in full bloom. We continued along the road, and my brother and my mom got ahead of me because I kept stopping to do iNaturalist, whereas my brother was just focusing on birds and doing the eBird checklist, so he didn't need to stop and take pictures of things. And really, we didn't get too many looks at birds. It was mostly done by ear. Here is some milkweed growing along the side of the road. Here's a black and gold flat millipede that was on the road. And you have to be careful about handling these because they actually secrete a cyanide compound. So if you ever touch these to move them off the road, for instance, just make sure you wash your hands afterwards. Don't be rubbing your eyes and stuff until you wash your hands. And here's a bit of a mixing of hobbies. This is the Bald Eagle Repeater Association 147.09 repeater, KB3HLL, for anyone who's into amateur radio. In a few spots, we had large areas of hay-scented fern. A bit over 3 miles in, you come to this old house just off of the road, and this is actually where you can break off onto the Broken Tip Trail. And I believe this was also the same area where there used to be a fire tower. So I think the house may be related to that, but really I don't know the history of it. Here's another tower with some communications equipment. Here's a big power line cut that brought a change in habitat and some different birds. So this is more edge habitat with some scrubby habitat. I know we had common yellowthroat. I think we had some brown-headed cowbirds, just a few different things. And we also had a nice look at some cedar waxwings. Here's a power line cut when we're looking off to the north here, and I know we had some indigo buntings at this spot. Here we have sensitive fern, and it gets the name sensitive because it's very sensitive to frost. But if you want, you can insult it and see if it gets its feelings hurt. Here we have the trunk of a paper birch tree, which I like because growing up we've always had a paper birch in our front yard. Here's another vista looking off to the north, and this was a cool spot because looking down here, this is actually the Robert Porter Allen Natural Area, and we could also see Lycoming College over here, which is where I went to school. Here's a black and white warbler carrying food. And when we take a look at the eBird checklist, you'll see that there's a lot of breeding codes. So this time of year, you can add breeding codes that show different levels of certainty about species nesting in an area. So for instance, a bird singing in an area might only bring a low certainty of nesting, whereas a bird building a nest brings a higher level, and actually seeing a nest that has young in it is a very high level. Here's another millipede. Obviously, this one's a different color, being red and black, and iNaturalist says that this is part of the American Giant Millipede Complex. Here's another vista, this one looking more off to the east. This down here is either one of the ponds or maybe even part of the Susquehanna River itself. The town of Montoursville would be over here to the left more, along with the Williamsport Regional Airport, and Route 15 would actually be cutting down through this wind gap in the mountain down here. And the Route 15 overlook where we hawk watch from would also be down in this area somewhere. And here's a bird that was probably my biggest target for the day because this is a species that I really don't see very often. This is a worm-eating warbler. So they have a pretty distinctive plumage. They're tan and they have these black racing stripes on the head. And they have a song that's a very, very fast insect-like trill. Here's another plant that I didn't recognize, and when I put it into iNaturalist, it says it's called Herb Robert, also known as Stinkin' Bob. So I took a picture because I thought it was a funny name. And I've always found club moss to be pretty interesting, although I don't really know much about it. But someone on iNaturalist called this flat-branched tree club moss. And 5.8 miles and 3.5 hours after we started, we made it to the rest area along Route 15 to end our hike. And taking a look at the eBird list, we had 38 species. But again, birds were mostly just heard. Not a very good morning for photos. This time of year, it's really difficult to get photos when you're birding in this kind of habitat. But let's take a look at some of the highlights. So we had 12 yellow-billed cuckoos. So it seems like it's a really good year for cuckoos, or maybe we're just birding in more of the habitat where they're common. But 12 yellow-billed, but no black-billed. The only woodpeckers that we had were 2 downy and 2 hairy. We did not have any yellow-bellied sapsuckers. They're found more in the northern part of the county rather than the southern part of the county, even though we were at fairly high elevation. We had 3 species of flycatchers. We had 9 eastern wood peewees, 2 Acadian flycatchers, and 2 great-crested flycatchers. And the Acadian flycatchers were all the way at the end of the walk, so you certainly don't have to walk almost 6 miles to get them. They're pretty much right at the very end, around the gate area of that rest stop. But that was a species I had not had for Lycoming County yet this year, so that was another big highlight of the morning for me. For vireos, we had 4 blue-headed vireos and 79 singing red-eyed vireos. So red-eyed vireos, extremely common summer bird here in Pennsylvania, one of the most numerous breeding birds in the state. We had a common raven, and ravens have really adapted to different habitats, and we even sometimes get them at the house there in Montoursville, but it's still cool to get them in the more mountainous, classic raven setting. We had 4 winter wrens singing, and I believe winter wrens have the longest song out of any songbird in North America. Certainly one of the longest, if not the longest. We only had 2 gray catbirds. They're not really a species of these big mountain forest regions, although we did get them in the more scrubby, disturbed habitat areas. And for thrushes, we had 6 wood thrushes and 8 American robins. We had 5 field sparrows, and again, that would be in the more disturbed habitat. We had 15 eastern towhees. The most numerous warbler of the day was ovenbird with 54. We had 3 worm-eating warblers, 19 black and white warblers, 5 common yellowthroats, 3 hooded warblers, 1 American redstart, 5 blackburnian warblers, 1 chestnut-sided warbler, 6 black-throated blue warblers, 1 prairie warbler, 16 black-throated green warblers. And finally, we had 23 scarlet tanagers, 1 northern cardinal, 1 rose-breasted grosbeak, and 13 indigo buntings. And a couple other notes, we saw a dead porcupine on the road, although we kept our distance and didn't touch it, and I'll spare you the photos because it was a little gruesome, but it was really cool to see that kind of species up close. It's certainly a species I've seen sometimes out in the woods, and usually you see them up in trees, but to actually get a close look at how big the quills are, they're really an impressive species. And also the number of American chestnuts. I didn't count the exact number, but it was probably somewhere around 30. So overall, a great morning of birding, a really nice walk, a lot of cool birds and a lot of cool plants and trees and other things as well. And it's nice to explore some new areas, especially when they're so close to home. So I hope you can get out birding soon and check out some places close to where you live. From LycoBirds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.